I started in the consulting industry around span of control. So looking at organizational structures in the banking and process and discrete manufacturing areas early in my career. So industrial engineer by trade. Over the last 30 years, I've been in software, so in a variety of functional areas. So I've implemented software, both TMS, WMS, ERP. So I've seen what it takes to kind of implement change and the resistance that you get. So I'll talk about this as I get into the AI story and the subtle differences. And then I've also prepared solutions for customers, right? So listening and learning of their pain and their desired outcomes and kind of preparing that, art of the possible, so to speak. So I did that for a few years. And then I've been in sales for 20 years across many products. So not only supply chain execution products, master data management, AI, TMS, supply chain planning, just to name a few. So I'm passionate about software, and I know software can bring change. What we see, and this is kind of the first part, that initial elation, that ambition, I'm going to do something, right? I've got Raft and I'm committed to this AI journey. What ends up happening is you start to see the realities of what it takes to execute, right? And in the logistics space, it's not about technology, so to speak. It's about making sure that people, processes, and trust is built as you go through your journey, right? So, when you think of those principles, that kind of drives everything, right? So if you think about that as you engage in the, let's call it AI journey, that will drive your success in your behavior, right? And I'll always say this comment, and I'll start with this comment, and I'll end with this comment, is AI isn't a one-off thing company-wide. It is a cultural thing. It is the fabric of everything you do forward. If you as an organization think that this is a one-off project, like maybe an ERP or TMS, it isn't. Will be consistently part of the fabric of what you do. And what's even more exciting is AI is not going away, right? The technology is just at the tip of the iceberg. So, who knows what will come in the future and what is possible, right? So if you go in with that frame of mind that AI is part of every decision we make, then this is an ever-evolving journey, right? So what are the challenges, right? And what are the differences? What do we see? A successful project or successful customer versus a not successful customer, right? And really what it is, companies underestimate the complexities of the day-to-day, right? So they trivialize that, it's easy. We just implement AI and all the pains go away. Well, that's not true at all, right? So the very first thing that you're going to get is skepticism from the frontline teams, right? Oh, you're replacing my expertise. I'm afraid that my team will all go away. So that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Is to how do you position that? And I'll talk a little bit more about shifting the mindset in kind of my next talk track, but just think about this, right? So it's like skepticism that you'll need to deal with. And how do you deal with that skepticism is quite important, right? And then what's even more critical is got to remember that AI doesn't only reside, like if I look at Raft's process and what we enable, the shipment lifecycle, right? We're not only dealing with, let's say, the creation of a shipment or the update of a shipment. It also involves customs and customs processes or financial processes. So you really have to go across geographies and business units to start thinking about the standardization effort, right, so to speak. And what are the difficulties tied to that, right? So that's also critically important. And what ends up happening is, go through a sales cycle, all, excitement to get there. But when you go down to start doing this, it starts to get quiet, right? And that kind of ties to the processes. So the first is the people, point that I said. The second is the process piece. And then the third is, hey, is my data even ready? AI is great. But if the quality of my data is terrible, if the quality of my master data is terrible, then your experience and your success with AI will also be considered terrible, right? So there are that data piece that needs to be also attended to. So I call that data readiness, right? So it's like, got it. So if I summarize, skepticism in the frontline teams, fragmented processes, non-standardized processes across regions, countries, within process, across region, across functional disciplines, and then your data readiness, right? So what are the most successful teams do, right? Like, so let's pivot, right? So these are the challenges. So what do most successful customers do, or what have we seen, right? It's quite interesting, right? It's really starting small, in my opinion. Select a process. I'll give you an example. I want to automate my customs declaration process in France. And I only want to do one document to start with, or I want to do one sub-process, and then expand, after that early win, right? Sometimes we do too much. I want to do every process across the region. I want to do different processes and maybe different ones across each region. That is quite complicated. And in a lot of cases, you haven't even thought about standardizing the process before you even start, right? So that's one key takeaway. Start simple, prove the value, create momentum from the top down, right? And then start, kind of pushing back on that frontline resistance that you're going to get. The second is, hey, let's start creating a feedback loop to say, hey, listen, look at all the success we're getting, and how the people are teaching the system, how the AI is learning, and the accuracy is increasing. So that kind of trust mechanism, right? So if you start small, you build trust quickly, you use as fuel to grow, right? So that's another important piece that we've seen a lot from our successful customers, that are on RAP. I would say that holds true for other AI companies as well, across other product lines, right? And then you always have to appoint internal champions, right? You need people that are going to go out to the wider teams and talk about the quick wins, and helping push back and kind of interpret concerns from other groups, right? So like, let's reduce the noise, let's increase the success, right? So those are kind of summarizes that first bucket, right? So the challenges, the differences between a successful customer and a non-successful customer. So here's another thing that, that I talk about a lot, even during the sales cycle. And this is, and I'll give some examples, not naming prospects. So I met with this customer and they said, hey, listen, we're getting ready for AI. I said, well, that's wonderful. That's a great idea. And how are you getting ready internally? Well, I've got an IT team and an operations team, and now they're responsible for the AI journey. And I said, that's fantastic, right? That's great. It shows that you're seeing this as a potential enabler, of change in your company. So what's your end desires? And what do you see your net new org structure looking like? And then the silence happens, right? So I think I know as we go through these sales cycles, I want customers to put themselves in the shoes of the operator and kind of understand like what the impacts are, right? And so I pivot quickly and say, hey, listen, you need to view yourself as the operator, that AI is the co-pilot, right? It's providing and replacing parts of your process, right? So it's augmenting your day in life. right? So the question is, what will we automate? How much of it will we automate, right? And kind of freeze that operator of the things that today may be painful or things that may be highly repetitive, right? So it's like, let's not make them fearful of losing their job. Make them understand that this tool will augment what they do, right? And make a big difference for them, right? It's like, hey, I'm now bringing value, in my day in the life with this co-pilot sits beside me, freeing up some of my time to do things that I haven't been able to do. So that's where the real fuel for AI comes into play. So let's kind of drop this whole notion of only efficiency, right? Efficiency is a piece of the value that comes in with implementing AI across your processes, but it also, you got to look at the revenue potential, the data latency improvements, the data quality improvements, and all of that comes with it, that are the intangibles really. So to me, this is truly a revenue play, right? And if I was to sit in the shoes of the freight forwarder, it's also your customers now view you as a digital player, right? And that your operators are happy to work in your organization because they're working on a modern platform, on a modern process, and not just typing data into a system, right? So that's kind of the part of changing the mindset. Look at AI as the enabler, not the threat. And then look at AI as your co-pilot buddy, right? And what part of your day in life can be automated, right? Within your task and across, different functional areas. And so, and we find that also, if you look at it that way, it goes back to what I said before, which is to start small, right? And just start pecking away at the components that, will quickly add up the value for you, right? And I love that question, right? So, and the reason why is why, I'll tie some of it to Raft and some of it to some of the remedial processes that are happening, or the reoccurring processes that are happening in customs. So with all this tariff noise, there is constant change in the data required, right? So from a technology perspective, you need a tool that can actually handle the changes in configuration. So one at the product level, one at the, let's say country level, and then one at, hey, what is my SOP with that customer and what are the impacts, right? So any one of those can be managed by a platform that has flexibility to kind of change the process on a dime, and then be able to kind of handle some of those variations that happen on a day-to-day basis, right? So that's one thing that RAF can bring to the table from a solution perspective that kind of enables that. From a, let's call it from a revenue or, early warning kind of process, you got to look at the aspect of, hey, good data in, right? If I'm dealing with the variation early in my process, then my downstream process is, increased from a data quality perspective, right? And then mitigates the risk at the last minute when I'm trying to clear my freight. So the earlier that we can address the data needs, the variation, the less risk we're going to have when the product arrives at the port or at the border crossing, right? So this is kind of the importance of AI, and because a lot of this process is highly repetitive, just understanding the uniqueness in the process and understanding the product requirements and the risk, enables you to really mitigate the manual effort that the operator has, and then reduce the risk, and then eliminate a lot of that tribal knowledge that goes into the day-to-day, and kind of unshackle that operator to do other things, right? So that's that revenue piece. Go out and find more business, or go out and do more classification of products to reduce my risk, right? So lots of benefits in the custom side for sure. Like I said, I always talk people, process, technology. I mean, the response to this kind of varies between the size of, let's call it the freight forwarder that we're working with, and you really have to kind of look from within and say, where are we in our digitalization journey, so to speak, right? Have we ever looked to standardize processes before? Do we have multiple systems that don't talk to each other? Therefore, people are using swivel chairs to kind of tie that end-to-end shipment process. How good is our data? Do we have 6 different versions of one creditor or 6 different versions of a shipper, right? All of these kind of questions need to be answered, in conjunction with embarking in an AI project, right? What good is it if you have terrible data and terrible process and you're just going to want AI to be your savior? That isn't going to happen, right? So you really have to embark in a process change in a data scrubbing exercise in order to kind of fully reap the values of AI, right, so to speak. So so that's why it isn't as easy as just, hey, go turn it on and it works for you. Yes, it brings some incremental value, but if your data is poor, you're still going to have issues, right? If the integration across system doesn't get addressed, you're still going to be manually inputting data downstream, right? So that's why you have to really start addressing some of these things holistically. And then the thing that really needs to be enforced is this top-down commitment, right? The last thing you want is at the operational level be mandated to do something, but there's nobody to be found at the executive level that even promotes that this needs to be done. So to me, this is a boardroom initiative that has boardroom commitments, right? Without that, it just doesn't succeed, or it succeed with some optimal results. Three years ago, there wasn't any, so to speak, if I just look at my journey at RAF. But if I look at where we are now in the active sales cycles that we're looking at and working with, there's been a humongous kind of impetus to hire resources such as head of innovation or head of process change or AI experts to come and help kind of bolster the roster. Because what I'm seeing is a lot of large organizations have these change groups, but very little AI knowledge, right? So in order to kind of quickly spike your knowledge of what's happening in the industry, they go out and hire folks that have done this before or are experts in AI or AI technologies or build product before. So they bring them in to kind of help complement the team. So that's one of the big shifts, hiring AI experts, hiring change agents to help kind of master that change. Then the second one I keep seeing is kind of data strategists. Hey, I have all this data. I need to look at the quality of this data. I need to look at the data across systems. I need to kind of start understanding the data set I need from AI in order to enable this, this improvement or this, I guess was this continuous change over time, right? So and kind of build out that adoption over time. So so two roles, really. Well, three actually. AI experts, head of innovation folks, and then really, more data scientists to kind of understand the data we have today and the data we're going to get, right? With it, because with AI, you're going to have, 10x the number of data that you have today. The question is, what are you going to do with it? And how do you want the system to learn over time, right? And how does that benefit you? So it's quite an interesting time. So I call this the industrial revolution of the 21st century, and kind of people laugh at me. But if you really sit down and think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? But there's this black hole of unknown. Oh, what am I going to do with all this efficiency? And am I ready for it, right? So it's like, and I know people are trying to figure that out. And so it's quite interesting times, to tell you the truth. Mention a bunch of things, right? The challenges, the shifting of the mindset, like doing something small and growing from there, kind of that aha moment, so to speak, right? But it's like, this is the advice I would give to anybody looking to do operational change at scale, right? So it's, technology is always going to bring you value. There's many products out there, right? But always anchor your change to outcome, right? Well, what do I mean by that? Well, what do I want to get? What do I want to get out of a customs process? Maybe I want to get faster clearances, fewer penalties, improved customer service, increased revenue, and by how much, right? So it's not the technology. The technology is going to work, right? If it's built correctly and it's purpose built for the industry. But if you don't anchor yourself to that desired outcome, what are you tracking against? How do you gauge success? Well, how do you gauge failure? How do you keep people accountable? How do you build a baseline? So you in essence, it's not necessarily the technology, it's the desired outcome that drives that success, right? And then, you have to, it's like, I'm not going to just implement this tool and not invest in how am I going to communicate to my people? How am I going to train my people, right? Today, they're used to hand feeding information into a system. How is that going to change? And how do I build that buy-in, so to speak, right? And the third one is, it goes back to what I've said always at the beginning. You got to build for adaptability, right? It's like, I'm going to be constantly changing, right? So this is a continuous evolving project, or partner if you want AI to be your buddy, right? So it's not a one-time implementation. It's not, one and done and I'm finished, I'll never go back and revisit it, right? I'm going to keep evolving, keep getting better. The technology is going to keep getting better, right? So it goes back to that cultural shift I said. If you don't view AI as a cultural shift, then you've already started on the wrong foot, right? So once you embrace that, right, as the enabler, then it changes everything you do from the top down, right? So it's fascinating to see that, but I think a lot of companies today don't completely see that today, right? It's something that they're still learning and trying to figure out. But until that mindset permeates from the top down, these projects will struggle, especially across tasks and across functional, pillars, so to speak, right? So because it's much more complicated. So it's an interesting journey, and hey, we love it here at Raft, and we've seen quite a bit of success from our tool and what our customers are doing. So that's all.